Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 98 of the Construction Record Podcast. This is Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, joining you today. The Construction Record is an official podcast partner of Buildings Week, brought to you virtually by the Buildings Show and Buildex Alberta from November 30th to December 4th. Today's episode is our special Buildings Week preview podcast, in which we will share with you some of the interviews we have done with key speakers and presenters at this year's event, in order to give you a flavor of what to expect. As a reminder, today, Friday, November 13th, is the early bird pricing registration deadline for the show. Now, as it concerns the show, here are some interesting details. The show will connect more than 70,000 design, construction, and real estate professionals. As well, the registration for the show will be quite in-depth. This information will be used to help attendees connect with similar people or recommend relevant sessions. As well, on the exhibition side, attendees can explore virtual booths and an online marketplace to discover leading product innovations, learn about technical specifications, or watch live product demonstrations. The online event will also feature more than 100 professionally accredited educational seminars, virtual panels, technical presentations, keynote sessions, and professional development workshops. The sessions will also feature audience polls, speaker Q&As, and group chats. Also in this podcast, after our feature interviews wrap up, I'll be joining you again to give you a bit more details about a special giveaway we are doing for Buildings Week. Thanks to our partners at Buildings Canada and Informa Connect, we are giving away 2 all-access passes valued at $150 for any of the over 120 sessions that are going to be happening at Buildings Week. So once again, please enjoy these featured interviews in which Warren Frey, our digital media editor, is going to tee them up for you once I'm done talking here. And after those interviews are done, join us again and I'll give you a bit more details about the giveaway for the all-access passes. And with that, over to Warren. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Vince. Like many other industry events this year, Buildings Week has gone virtual, with the same series of seminars and roundtables, but in an online format that doesn't depend on physical location. Still, we wanted to give a flavor of the traditional trade conference floor we've all experienced, so we created our own audio roundtable through interviews with several speakers presenting at Buildings Week events from November 30th to December 4th. Quang Trong of Portland-based architecture, engineering, and construction tech startup Polytechnica, HVAC expert Conlan of Hanson Professional Services, and Alex Crandall of the HIDI Group consultancy all spoke to us about how COVID-19 is changing how their firms do work, but also about what they've observed in their individual practices as our world changes rapidly to address the virus alongside the rise of data as a force for the industry to harness. When I spoke to Conlan, he explained how his involvement with the ASHRAE regulatory body helped form best practices for dealing with not only COVID, but other respiratory concerns.
When the task force formed, we actually evaluated and said, and discussed, does HVAC play a role? And at that point in April, ASHRAE came out and said, we believe that it is sufficiently likely to be airborne, and therefore your HVAC plays a part. And so from the get-go, we were trying to help people understand how to utilize their HVAC system to minimize the amount of virus transmission in their building. Mm-hmm. And not everyone, I say, agreed at that point in time. But from that point on, it's been for ASHRAE and the task force, it's really been about trying to make sure that we are providing the proper guidance and call it, technically responsible but economically feasible for buildings to be able to mitigate virus transmission.
Crandall said HIDI Group was involved in Ontario's initial response to the pandemic, and while the structure seemed simple, they involved sophisticated systems.
We've been fortunate enough to help out with the pandemic response units in some of the hospitals in Ontario. When you drive by, they look almost like circus tents, little white temporary tents sitting outside of the main hospital building. But they're actually like about 100 or so beds with a fairly sophisticated ventilation system. It's basically everything you'd expect from a hospital ward on a floor in a hospital, but outside. So we've been fortunate enough to help out with those. Our mechanical design team did a bunch of great work there. Our commissioning team got to make sure everything was running properly and ready for move-in.
Polytechnica looks at data-driven solutions to architecture and urban planning, and Trong thinks that same data can help buildings and communities with present and future health crises.
I wouldn't say that we're necessarily there yet, but I do think that we do have these goals in our environment to kind of create them more sustainably, create them more efficiently. But I also think now we have, obviously additional goals. I think health and equity are two big goals that are kind of, new and contemporary.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
I wouldn't say
obviously,
new,
yeah.
but that can be addressed by this data, and I think are meaningfully addressed by this data. And the incorporation of data into the way we build buildings. And so I think those are things that are, to, contemporary practitioners or people who are kind of interested in the health of our urban spaces at this moment. Those are big goals that I think hopefully our technological tools can address. I think it has to do with how we use the space that we can build, right? Right now, all of our kind of urban spaces, at least, were kind of predicated on the ability for it to kind of commercially function in a certain way with a certain density. And now we need to kind of take a look at that density again and kind of understand what kind of density do we really mean in order to kind of function with the kind of the awareness of pandemics, right? Zoning typically had to do with the segregation of uses, right? You had industrial over here and residential over there. Given our new commercial functioning and the way our economy functions now, do those distinctions make as much sense? So there's all these kind of questions about how we use our space and how dense our spaces are that can be addressed with kind of understanding our regulations, right? The first step is kind of like understanding what our regulations allow, and then kind of making the decision about, well, how do we want to alter or change or manipulate those regulations to kind of make the environment that we think functions best.
So the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force was formulated by the Environmental Health Committee with the oversight of the ASHRAE board. Bill Bonfleth is the chair of it, and it looked at three things to deal with. The immediate, which was COVID-19, the near term at that point, which is now the second wave that we're seeing, and then the long term of how do we take the guidance and the information that we're providing to help HVAC systems reduce the transmission and have it be a part of the ASHRAE handbooks or standards or guides to help for the future. The core principles would be based, for where all the guidance is, and the simple is follow public health guidelines, right? We're talking HVAC, not for everything else. Utilize and make sure your systems are bringing in at least code or designed outdoor air. And then have your recirculated air use MERV 13 filters or the equivalent of MERV 13 filters through filtration, air cleaning like UVC or bipolar, and other items, or through local or in-room, the portable units that you're seeing being deployed. And making sure your systems are working properly. And that's really the gist of where it's at.
Crandall also told us while the ASHRAE guidelines were a start, he found it was necessary to drill down with each individual project to ensure systems are in place to fight pandemic-related threats.
For existing buildings, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, ASHRAE, they've put out some pretty good guidance on how to configure your ventilation systems in your existing building to best mitigate the spread of COVID. The guidance is fairly generic. And it takes a bit of expertise to figure out how best to massage that guidance into actionable items for your own building. So we've been helping a bunch of buildings there just figure out how best to protect our tenants based on ASHRAE's guidance.
Both Conlan and Crandall think even once the pandemic is over, it will have long-lasting effects on how and what we build.
It will have an impact because part of the ASHRAE Standard 62 for the ventilation, in essence, becomes code, is that you are taking into account outdoor air for people and area. And if you have less people, you'll need less code outdoor air. However, for a virus, you're not getting rid of someone's bioeffluence. You're worried about the particulate that is contamination. And so are you going to reduce the amount of outdoor air that you design in, or are you going to keep it the same and just be able to control it to not use as much energy when you don't need it?
A couple things have sort of come to mind over the past few months. Remember before this started, the buzzword for everybody was densification. Let's build our ventilation systems and our heating and cooling systems so we can put as many people on a floor as possible. Can we get to 1.5 times the initial building occupancy when the building was built in the 70s or 80s? And I expect that densification won't be as hot a topic going forward. That's one of the items. I think some people might take humidity a little more seriously. Just generally for infectious diseases, you want a humidity range between 40 and 60%. I know that the offices that I've worked in for the past little while have not really achieved that, but I'm hoping that folks will at least consider designing a building to be capable of that. Should a pandemic occur again, or two, just to improve the overall comfort and health and well-being of the people in the building, even when there isn't a pandemic. So I'm hoping that gets put forward and gets championed.
Conlan focuses a lot on retrofitting, and he said adapting old buildings to these new circumstances can be a challenge.
Depending on when it was built, the codes have changed over the years, right? Especially ventilation codes. Prior to the oil and the energy crisis, it was bring in all the air and run at constant volume all the time. And so some of those buildings actually may have a lot more ventilation or fan capacity that could be used. Then energy crunch came in and outdoor air was reduced. So there's some buildings that are designed out there that only have 5 CFM per person, as opposed to the 15 or 20 when the sick building syndrome started to kick in. And so depending when you were built, you may have great ventilation, or you may have poor ventilation or less ventilation available. The kicker with those older buildings is, are they controlling the outdoor air and making sure that you're bringing it in at all times when people are there in the building? And then the ability to modify them or optimize them to use less energy but still provide that level of safety can be tougher to make happen in older buildings. Climate is a huge part in this, and climate also impacts how systems are designed, right? So I went to school at Penn State, grew up in the Northeast, and I had lots of buildings that just had the big radiator and the window was your ventilation. Well, you can't use that in all weather forms. So are you bringing in the ventilation in terms of COVID time? And there's other areas in the Northwest, more towards, up, and then even up in Vancouver, where there's a lot of buildings where they don't bother with return air, because the outdoor air is at such a temperature that it costs overall less for the building to just be 100% outdoor air. The key thing to look at in these buildings when you're saying they're off or in their moderate times is, are you providing ventilation when people are in the space? And when you're recirculating the air, if you have that, are you filtering it to a level that is what ASHRAE's target is, which is that MERV 13?
Finally, Trong sees an opportunity at the macro level for startups to address construction's Achilles heel. It's one of the biggest industries on the planet, but it's also one of the least efficient.
I am starting to see a number of startups that are popping up trying to address these inefficiencies in the built environment. I think there was there was a McKinsey report that came out a number of years ago where it stated, construction's, I think, a $60 trillion a year industry. I might be getting my numbers wrong, so don't quote me on that.
Big, one way or the other, yeah.
Exactly. It's a huge industry, but it's also the most inefficient industry, like kind of contemporary, so there's all these inefficiencies in the construction industries. And all these startups, I think, since that McKinsey report have kind of popped up to kind of address some of the inherent inefficiencies in this industry, to kind of try and, both to get value out of it, but also to kind of address some of the issues that we have in our built environment.
So as we end our day at the virtual trade show, it seems the biggest takeaway is the industry isn't merely reacting to outside forces like the pandemic, it's responding. Whether it's crunching the data, adapting to new health needs, taking a hard look at current standards, or even moving an entire series of conferences online, it's safe to say construction will continue innovating in the face of COVID-19 and events we can't yet predict.
Hello everyone, Vince Versace joining you again. I hope you enjoyed those feature interviews that Warren conducted for this podcast, and hopefully they tweak your interest in wanting to attend Buildings Week. Now I imagine if you're still listening at this part of the podcast, you just might be interested in the free all-access pass giveaway that we're doing. in conjunction with our partners at Buildings Canada and Informa Connect. So once again, those passes are 2 all-access passes valued at $150 for any of the over 120 sessions happening at Buildings Week from November 30th to December 4th. Now, in order to cast a ballot for the giveaway, you'll need either a Twitter account or a Instagram account. First, we'll start with Instagram. If you're going to cast your ballot via Instagram, we'll need you to create a post, tag the construction record in that post. Our account on Instagram is at the construction record, all lowercase, all one word. And in that post, you'll need to share with us a cool photo of a project you're either working on, you're associated with, or you recently completed. Now, if you're going to cast your ballot for the giveaway on Twitter, you have one of two choices. Do note, we do not have a construction record account on Twitter, but we do have our Daily Commercial News Twitter account and our Journal of Commerce Twitter account. So, if you wish to cast your ballot for the giveaway via Twitter, create a post on Twitter, either mentioning at DCN_Canada or at JOC_Canada. The post has to have a photo, as I described before, of a project you're either involved in or have been involved in or recently built and completed, and mention that you're entering for the giveaway associated with the construction record. So we will accept these mentioned posts, which are basically your entries, until the end of day of November 24th. Then on November 25th, we will conduct a draw from all the posts that we received via Instagram and Twitter. We will record this drawing of the 2 winners' names for both our podcast and just a separate post altogether that we'll share with everybody via social media and our website. So the drawing will be recorded via video and audio and shared with all of you. So once again, enter via Instagram or Twitter to win your all-access passes to Buildings Week this year. With that, if you have any questions, do email us at editor@dailycommercialnews.com. Please note, you can't cast a ballot for the giveaway via that email. That email is strictly for any questions around clarification or just in general, as I always say, for feedback. We like to hear from our listeners. Never hesitate to call us or email us. With that, thank you very much, everyone.